Okay, so last time we were talking about FM synthesis, and it was pretty difficult and pretty complicated. I want to talk about a related concept today. This is going to be very much related, though still somewhat different, though I think this is slightly easier to understand, if anything, and if you can understand this, this will help you understand FM synthesis better. So what I'm talking about today is primarily going to be ring modulation. And ring modulation has been around for a while. We've been able to do it with analog circuits really since like I think around the early 1960s or so. Maybe even a little bit earlier. We had, experimentalist composers like Karlheinz Stockhausen playing a lot with this in the late 1960s and early 1970s in his music. It was getting used as primarily special effects and making weird sounds up until, pretty much I'll say the digital revolution, where most people were avoiding it. And now, people will use it, but it's still kind of rare, it's still kind of geeky, and it's not a well-known effect. So we'll talk about what it does. Well, actually, I'll try to describe exactly what it does today, which is pretty cool, and then we'll play you some examples. So first, I've got a synthesizer open here. It's Absinthe 5, what we've been using, and right now I've got loaded a single sine wave, and let's actually just tune it to a certain frequency just for today, and we'll say 440 hertz because that's a good amount. And I'm going to tune my ring modulator. Right now it's on 0.0001 hertz, and that's perfect. So I'm just going to play a note. It should be a 440 hertz. There it is. That's what it sounds like. And right now, basically, that's all you hear. You just hear that single sine tone, and you can see it on the graph over here. Watch what happens as I turn up the ring modulator, and listen as well as watch this graph. Okay, did you follow along with that? That was really exciting, wasn't it? Oh, pardon me. So it was really just one sine tone, but then it quickly got a little bit of this wavering kind of effect, this tremolo effect. We'll talk about why this happens in a moment, right? Where it was going like this. And then as the ring modulator frequency went up, it actually started to get faster and faster until it sort of got so fast it had to split apart, right? It's like it made babies going to either side of it. So actually we have now 3 sine tones. We have 3 individual frequencies that kept going up, or one was going up, one was going down rather, until the down one went so far it went actually off of the graph. And once it goes below 0, it actually then started going up again. So right, you can actually see both of them are here now going up. Okay, so that was pretty cool, I think you'll admit. And this is very similar to frequency modulation, right? Because in frequency modulation, we saw a primary frequency give rise to these sidebands, and the same kind of thing is happening here. I want to give you one other example, though, before we talk about what exactly is going on. I think I've loaded this. There we go. Yeah, so this is, well, really annoying to listen to. Let's turn that off while I'm talking. This is a ring modulator on my voice that I can tune. And I have Absinthe actually running in as an Absinthe effect, as you can see this. So we can actually use all the synthesizer processing here on actual audio, not just oscillators, which is pretty cool. You can, you can see that I have audio in, and I'm modulating by 220 hertz. Just listen to my voice, and I'm going to move my pitch of my voice around. So right there, you can hear how it clicks in. It sounds kinda good. Let me turn that off. So if you were listening, and I hope that wasn't too painful, it just occurred to me that was probably one of the most embarrassing sounds that I can make in front of a microphone. But hopefully you were listening and you realized that on certain pitches, certain notes, certain frequencies that I was singing, the ring modulator actually kind of clicked in and sounded like it was just playing like a pure tone, just like a very pleasing beep. But other times when my voice was a little bit off, it actually went to kind of like garbage. It just sounded like it was kind of fighting itself. And again, this has to do with that idea of harmonicity. And way back in one of the earlier videos and what makes music sound good, if you go back and review those concepts, this should start to make sense why this is the case. So let's talk a little what's going on the inside. So I'm going to open up my little bamboo paper here. And just to refresh from last video, we talked about frequency modulation. So this is our frequency modulation graph. And we talked about the output of frequency modulation being the sums and differences for all frequencies involved, right? So if I have 500 hertz and 100 hertz, I'm going to get 400 and 600. And then in the case of frequency modulation, I'm also going to get 300 and 700 and 200 and 800, right? Just keep adding and subtracting 100 hertz from 400 hertz, or excuse me, 500 hertz. Ring modulation is very, very similar. So let me draw my ring modulation graph over here. So same thing, here's our amplitude on the left, and our frequency from 20 to 20,000 across the bottom. And let's say I'm putting in 500 hertz into my ring modulator. So that's 500. And I'm going to modulate by 100 hertz. Same thing as we just did before. So very similar to frequency modulation. Lo and behold, I'm also going to get the output is going to equal the sum and difference, I'll say difference of all frequencies. You said, well, that's the same thing. Well, we should refine our definition of frequency modulation, because frequency modulation, not only do you get the sum and the difference, but you also get the original, right? We got 400, 600, which is 500 minus 100 and 500 plus 100. But we also got 500. In ring modulation, we get the 400. Let me draw my little 400 line and my 600 line. So there's those. But we actually lose the original. So we don't get the original sound anymore. And even though when I was speaking through the microphone, you could still hear my original voice, that's actually just because you're only hearing, actually what I should have done is record it, I guess. You're hearing me through the microphone as I'm recording this video in addition to the ring modulator. So actually the sound of my original voice would be vanished completely, and all you'd be left with are these sidebands. And for ring modulation, or I should say, unlike frequency modulation, ring modulation doesn't create more sidebands. It doesn't go on, keep going down and keep going up. Rather, you only get one pair for each of the two frequencies involved in ring modulation. So it's a much less rich sound. It's a little bit less flexible in that way, but it is a little bit simpler. What we can do with ring modulation, though, as you guys saw, is, you know, depending on what the modulator frequency is, we can adjust how far these sidebands go up or down. And at one point, when we turned it up really high, this 400 went all the way down to 0 hertz. So all we were hearing was the top, the higher one, which was going upward. But something very cool happens with sidebands. You can't go negative in terms of frequency. Like, negative frequency doesn't exist. If you think about this, this kind of makes sense, right? Think about your daily life. If you say, you know, I go to the store to buy milk once a week, right? You say, once a week I go to the store to buy milk. That's a frequency, right? How often? Once a week. What happens? You go to the store to buy milk. You could say you go to the store once every 2 weeks, right? You go to the store once every 2 days. Those are also frequencies. But it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense if you say, I go to the store to buy milk every -1 weeks, right? This doesn't really conceptually make sense. I'm not even sure how you would interpret that, right? Every -1 weeks you go to the store to buy milk. Are you a time traveler? I don't get this, right? This doesn't work. And lucky for us, I mean, the same, because it doesn't work in our concrete example here. It doesn't work in the synthesizer either. When we actually would go below 0 hertz, and the sound actually reflects off of 0 hertz. And what I mean by this is, think about the following situation. Let's say I have a carrier frequency of 500 hertz, like I just did, right? Put that back in. And I'm going to modulate it by 600 hertz. Right, so I'm going to modulate by 600. So I'll do this little squiggly, modulate by 600. And we know that we need the sums and differences. Well, what's the 500 minus 600? Well, that's going to be -100. But we can't have negative frequency, so it actually just turns out we just have +100. That's all that means. So as we keep going lower and lower, lower, at some point we'll hit 0 and we'll actually bounce back up and come back up. That's exactly what was happening here in this synthesizer. Let's go back to this one. As I start here and I go outward, you can see these, whoops, too far, go back. You can see these outward sidebands getting further and further apart. And at some point, they go all the way down. That's very, very low. If you have a very good sound system, you can hear this. If you don't, you're probably not hearing this really low, rumbly tone. Let's keep going further. You can see as I get lower and lower, at some point, I hit 0, and there's no sound at 0. I only hear the 2. Actually, I really only hear... I hear the original in this case, just because, again, you know, I know I just told you the 500 hertz would be destroyed, but again, I'm recording it through the microphone, and I didn't mute the other track, so oh well. Anyway, so as I keep going higher and higher, do you see that 0 hertz keep coming back up? It's actually reflected off of 0. It's actually playing negative, you know, 70 hertz right now. And you can see them both going up now. Both sidebands are now going up because the bottom one has been reflected. And in theory, if I were actually go high enough, I'd actually reflect off of a point way up here, actually just a little over here, and actually those would come back down too. I don't know if it'll let me go that high or not. Yeah, it maxes out. So I can't quite go high enough to get them both to reflect off the top end. But that's a different scenario entirely anyway. Okay, so you can see that basically frequency can't be negative, and I can reflect off 0 hertz. Ring modulation, just like frequency modulation, creates sidebands that are, you know, a certain frequency distance away from the original. Okay, one other really cool thing that was happening I wanted you to point out, when I got really, really close to 0, say under 20, between 0 and 20, let's say right now I'm at 8, I'm no longer creating 2 sidebands. I think this is even more pronounced around 4 or 5 hertz. Where you just instead see a single sideband pulsing up and down. And why this is happening has to do with this idea called phase. We haven't really talked about a whole lot, but we'll introduce today. Let's go back to the paper. Go to a new page. And I'm just making sine waves, right? That's all I'm doing. So a sine wave looks like this, right? And this is just telling the speaker to push out and then pull back, right? This is all this graph is doing. We're doing it over and over again, right? To make a frequency, right? That's what a frequency is, just this shape repeatedly over and over and over again. Well, what happens if I were to play a very similar frequency right next to it, and one that maybe was just a little bit longer? So you can see here's where this one goes up, right? And this one comes down here, but this one comes down here. So you can see there's a little bit of a gap between them. And then they start to push up again. And then right here, while this one is pushing down, this one is pushing up. So they're actually, right here at the start, they're more or less doing the same thing, right? They're both going up right here, right? They're both pushing the speaker out. Here, they're kind of getting a little bit off. They're getting further off, but they're both kind of still pushing the speaker down. Over here, one's going up and they're both kind of going up. I mean, this one's definitely going up, but this one's on its way up. But when we get to this one right here, and I'll do this in dramatic pink fashion, we have the situation where one of them is actually pushing the speaker down and one of them is pushing the speaker up. In other words, they cancel out. And when they cancel out, we get silence. And you might say, okay, well, I understand that, but what does that have to do with ring modulation? Well, this is exactly the scenario. If I'm modulating 500 hertz by 502 hertz, don't I have 2 sine waves that are just a little tiny bit off? That's exactly what's happening when I modulate, you know, because I'm getting 500 hertz plus 2 hertz, which would be 502 hertz. They'll be just a little bit off, and actually twice a second, right? We know hertz is in cycles per second, and the difference here is 2. So I know twice per second, the sound will completely cancel out. And that's why it sounds like it's it's coming in and out, okay? Because it's this phase difference of this what we call destructive interference is the more technical term. And it's a pretty cool sound. I mean, it sounds like tremolo. If we go back to the synthesizer, here it is just one more time. And again, if I slow it all the way down to 1 hertz, it's going to cancel out once a second. So this is a good way to keep time, right? If you don't know it, you don't have a stopwatch, let's say. Well, you can load up your synthesizer, cause it to phase once a second, and you'll have it phase once a second. It'll be great. So that's ring modulation in a nutshell. I would say it's really useful for, or at least that's the ring modulation basic, let's say. It's really useful if you want to create some alien voices. Again, if you watch a lot of sci-fi television, you'll hear bad voices like this whenever the space invaders are coming to attack you. I'm also getting a little bit of feedback. Again, I have a live microphone here in the room where I'm playing this, so it's has a little overpronounced effect to it. But I think you get the idea. But you can also use it to do very interesting things just to your own synthesized tones. And again, we don't have to ring modulate sine waves. This is where ring modulation becomes really interesting. We could take something like, let's do a square wave. So here's what a regular square wave sounds like. And a little nasty sounding at the top end. Does this fix it? That helps it a little bit. Okay, so we got the square wave. You can see it's got all this harmonic content. Well, we can use the ring modulator to generate more harmonic content. Right now it's only on 1 hertz, so it's just going to do that phasing thing. But as I turn this up, you're going to see sidebands created for each one of those harmonics in the original sound, right? You can now see that each frequency is split into 3, right? Each frequency just had 3 babies, or 2 babies, I guess. And it's a pretty cool sound. Notice what happens if I type in 220 hertz. And I'm playing 440 hertz, and I'm modulating by 220 hertz, and a little light bulb should be going off in your head right now, right? This is called a harmonic relationship. In other words, 220 is divisible into 440 by 2, and you should know, right, from our other videos, this is going to sound, well, we'll say more pleasant, right? It's actually like a musical tone. If I actually put this on transposition mode, and I say ratio, and I'll put this on a 0.5 ratio, because that's what our ratio was between 440 and 220. This will actually adapt to whatever note I'm playing on the keyboard. Not a bad sound, right? If I move this to an inharmonic relationship, in other words, something that's not divisible by a whole number, right? This is, 0.5 is really, divided by 2. Let's say I go to, 0.59. It sounds kind of yucky again. Oops. But check out what happens when I get to 0.66. It actually kind of becomes harmonic again to a fair degree. 0.66 isn't completely, right, it's divisible by, was it 3 halves? So it's not completely a rational number, but it's closer. If I go to something like 0.25, it's well, it's close. Actually, you know, it'd be better. It would just be 2, right? So this is divided by 1/2. Actually, it's just reinforcing a square wave. How about 3? Right, and 3.1 won't be so nice. It can be very cool, especially if you're looking for really unique timbres and alien type sound effects. It can be really cool, but often if you're going to use ring modulation, it'll be just really whole numbers or integer numbers, or and usually when I use it, I'll use very, very, very close to a whole number. So right here I have this square wave, but check out what happens if I'm just a little bit off. I get these really nice either pulsing and phasing effects. Right, those can be very cool. Or let's use actually a sawtooth wave, I think, just for fun, and be a little bit off. Actually, let's be about 0.5. 3 will probably be better. A little too far. There we go. Right, creates these sounds that sort of have this character, have this life, that are sort of fighting itself. You can see this. I'm just holding one note down, and you can see this sound come in and out of phase, and it's got this really nice sort of like living characteristic. And this is a problem for a lot of digital music, right? Digital music is essentially dead. Any music you synthesize inside the box is dead, and you got to work really hard to make it sound like it, it has a certain life to it. And just by getting very, very close to a rational harmonic number, but still being a little bit off, it's a really good way to give it some life. Oh, by the way, the balance here just will balance between the original sound and the ring modulated sound. So in this case, we're hearing the original combined with the ring modulated frequencies. Here is just the original, and here is just the sidebands. So anyway, that's pretty much it for ring modulation. There's a very related concept called frequency shifting, which is really just half of ring modulation. It's really just modulating instead of going on either side of 500 hertz, right? You take 100 hertz and you go to 400 and you go to 600. With frequency shifting, you're actually just going either up or down, and it has this little type for plus or minus. So frequency shifting, very similarly related. It's just half of ring modulation. Okay, that's going to conclude our ring modulation video. Again, that was kind of geeky, I know, but hopefully it was fun for some of you. Hopefully you guys are all, willing to be some geeks sometime. Next video, we'll actually start designing some more sounds with Absinthe. You will, I think you'll get a lot out of the next few videos if you're looking to synthesize your own music.